Welcome back to Scary Stories for Sleep. Tonight's story follows a man who spent 30 days trapped inside the Backrooms, a place where reality breaks down, entities roam the endless halls, and escape comes at a terrible cost. This is the story of how he survived, and why he wishes he hadn't. Let's begin. If you're hearing this, then somehow my recording made it out. My name is Ethan Carter. 3 years ago, I disappeared. According to everyone else, I was missing for 30 days. According to me, I spent those 30 days trapped inside the Backrooms. Most people think the Backrooms are just an internet story, a creepy picture, a meme. They're wrong. The Backrooms are real, and they're hungry. I wasn't some explorer looking for trouble. I wasn't chasing urban legends or making videos for the internet. I worked maintenance with my best friend Jake. We'd known each other since middle school. The kind of friend who could annoy you for 10 straight hours and still be the first person you'd call when things went bad. If I had known what was waiting for us that day, I would have turned around and gone home. Instead, I followed him, and that's why he's dead. It started in an abandoned shopping mall scheduled for demolition. The place had been closed for nearly 10 years. Broken skylights, collapsed ceilings, flooded hallways. Most of the stores were empty shells coated in dust. Jake loved places like that. Every time we found some weird room or forgotten hallway, he'd start acting like we were uncovering government secrets. Around noon, while we were inspecting an old service corridor behind the food court, Jake called my name. "Ethan, get over here." I walked over expecting another rat nest. Instead, he was standing in front of a section of drywall that had partially collapsed. Behind it was a hallway neither of us had ever seen before. "That's not on the blueprint," Jake said. "You checked. Twice." The corridor stretched into darkness. Concrete walls, no markings, no doors, just a straight line disappearing into the distance. "Probably an old service tunnel," I said. "Then why isn't it on any of the plans?" I didn't have an answer. Jake grinned. That should have been my warning. Whenever Jake grinned like that, something stupid usually followed. "Come on, we have work. It'll take 30 seconds. Famous last words. We turned on our flashlights and stepped inside. The temperature immediately dropped. The sounds of the mall faded behind us. First I thought it was normal. Then I noticed something strange. We'd been walking for several minutes. The hallway should have ended. Instead, it kept going. Concrete became yellow wallpaper. I didn't notice the change immediately. 1 second I was looking at stained concrete. The next I was staring at faded yellow walls. The floor beneath my boots softened. Carpet. Wet carpet. The air smelled like mold. Old mold. The kind that had been growing for years. I stopped walking. "So, that's weird." Jake looked around. The grin was gone. "What happened to the tunnel?" I turned around. My stomach dropped. The entrance was gone. No collapsed drywall. No shopping mall. No tunnel. Just another yellow hallway stretching endlessly behind us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly. An endless electrical hum. The sounds seemed to come from every direction at once. Jake laughed nervously. "Okay, not funny." I wasn't laughing, because something felt wrong. Not scary, not yet. Wrong. The hallways seemed too large, too empty, too silent, like reality itself wasn't built correctly. We started walking. An hour passed. Nothing changed. Every room looked identical. Every corner led to another hallway. Every hallway led to another room. The wallpaper never ended. The lights never ended. The carpet never ended. Eventually, Jake sat down. "Maybe we're lost." I looked at him. "Lost where?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, because neither of us knew. We had entered a hallway inside a shopping mall. Now we were standing inside a place that shouldn't exist. And deep down, both of us knew it. The first sign that we weren't alone came 6 hours later. We found footprints. Fresh footprints. Human footprints. Someone had walked through the carpet recently. The tracks disappeared around a corner. For the first time since arriving, I felt hope. Someone else was here, Maybe they knew how to get out. Maybe they had food. Maybe they had answers. We followed the footprints for nearly 20 minutes. Then we found where they ended. Not because the person stopped walking, because the person had been dragged away. Dark stains covered the carpet. A backpack sat abandoned against the wall. The zipper was open. The contents were scattered across the floor. A flashlight, a notebook, several crushed crackers, and a human hand. Jake froze. I froze. The hand looked fresh, not skeletal, not old, fresh. The notebook lay open beside it. Written across the page in shaky handwriting were 7 words. If you hear laughter, do not follow it. Neither of us spoke. Then, somewhere far away in the endless hallways, we heard people laughing. The laughter sounded distant, human, normal, the kind of laughter you'd hear at a birthday party. For a moment, I almost felt relieved. Jake definitely did. You hear that? I nodded. People. Neither of us mentioned the hand. Neither of us mentioned the blood. Because if there were other survivors, maybe there would be answers. Maybe there would be food. Maybe we'd finally wake up from whatever nightmare this was. The laughter echoed again. Closer this time. A mixture of voices. Men, women, children. I remember thinking how impossible that sounded. Children. What children would be trapped somewhere like this? But desperation does strange things to your judgment. We followed the sound. The farther we walked, the louder it became. Soon we could hear music, cheerful music, the kind played at cheap birthday parties. Jake actually smiled, for the first time all day. I told you. I didn't answer. Something felt wrong. The music never changed. The same melody repeated over and over. Exactly the same every time. No mistakes, no variation, just a perfect loop. Then we saw balloons. Bright colored balloons tied to the ceiling. The first splash of color we'd seen since arriving. The yellow halls suddenly opened into a larger room. Streamers covered the walls. Plastic tables lined the center. Party hats, presents, cake. It looked like somebody had built a birthday party in the middle of the backrooms. The laughter stopped. Instantly, the silence hit so hard it made my ears ring. Every person in the room stood completely still. There had to be 20 of them, maybe more. They were facing away from us, motionless, not talking, not moving, not breathing, just standing. Jake stepped forward. Hello. Nobody answered. The room remained frozen. I grabbed his arm. We should go. Why? Just trust me. Then one of the figures moved. Slowly, its head rotated. Not its body, just its head, turning farther than a human neck should allow. The movement continued until it was staring directly at us. My stomach dropped. The smile stretched from ear to ear. Too wide, far too wide. His eyes looked wrong, empty, like painted glass. Then another turned, and another, and another. Soon every face in the room was staring at us, all smiling. Nobody blinked, nobody moved, just smiling. The figure nearest to us tilted its head. Its voice sounded almost human, almost, "Would you like to join the party?" Every instinct in my body screamed at me, "Run." I didn't answer, neither did Jake. The thing took a step forward. Its grin widened. "You look hungry." Another step. "We have cake." Another. "You can stay forever." Jake finally whispered, "Ethan, run." The entire room moved, not walking, charging. Every smiling figure exploded into motion. Party hats flew from their heads. Tables overturned. Balloons burst. The sound that came from them wasn't laughter anymore. It was screaming, dozens of voices screaming at once. Jake and I turned and sprinted. Footsteps thundered behind us. The halls blurred together, corner after corner, room after room. Still they followed. I risked a glance backward. Worst mistake of my life. The nearest one couldn't have been more than 20 feet away. The smile had grown even larger. The corners of its mouth split open. Blood dripped down its chin. Yet somehow it was still smiling, still running, still getting closer. We ran for what felt like hours. The screaming never stopped. Eventually, we found a narrow maintenance corridor, barely wide enough for one person. Jake dove inside. I followed. The smiling things piled into the entrance. Too many bodies, too little space. For several seconds, they clawed at the opening, scratching, grabbing, reaching. Then they stopped. The silence returned. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. Minutes passed. Finally, the sounds disappeared, gone, as if they had never existed. Jake leaned against the wall, trying to catch his breath. Then his face went pale. My backpack. I looked at him. What? My backpack. He had dropped it during the chase. The backpack contained nearly all our food. Our batteries, our flashlight charger, everything. For a long time, neither of us said anything. Then Jake laughed. A short, nervous laugh. The kind people make when they realize they're in serious trouble. We're screwed. For the first time since entering the backrooms, I couldn't argue with him. The next few days were the worst of my life. Not because of the entities, not because of the endless hallways, because of thirst. People always imagine starvation as the thing that kills you first. They're wrong. Water becomes your entire world. Every thought, every decision, every step. By day 9, my mouth felt like sandpaper. My lips were cracked and bleeding. Jake looked even worse. His skin had gone pale. His eyes seemed sunken. We stopped talking as much because speaking wasted energy. The backrooms felt different too, almost like it knew we were weakening. The hallways seemed quieter. The buzzing lights seemed louder. Every corner felt like it was watching us. Then Jake found the outpost. At first, I thought it was another hallucination. A metal door stood in the middle of a hallway, the first real door we'd seen since arriving. Written across it in black paint were 3 letters, M.E.G. What does that mean? Jake asked. No idea. The door creaked open. Inside was an abandoned survivor camp. Shelves, tables, mattresses, supply crates. For the first time in days, hope returned. People had lived here, real people. The shelves had mostly been emptied, but we found a few useful items. Batteries, a flashlight, several notebooks, and 6 bottles of clear liquid. Each bottle carried the same label, almond water. Jake grabbed one immediately. Wait, he froze. What? I pointed toward the wall. A message had been written there. The words looked rushed, desperate. They know we come back for the water. Jake lowered the bottle. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then we heard a sound, a metallic clang, somewhere deeper inside the outpost. Both of us turned. Silence. The sound came again. Clang. Jake whispered, "Someone's here." I wanted to believe that, but something felt wrong. The camp was too empty, too quiet. No personal belongings. No signs of a struggle. Just abandoned, like everyone had vanished at once. The flashlight illuminated another wall. More writing. This time there were dozens of messages. Don't trust the voices. They can mimic people. No exit is easy. We lost Thomas. We lost everyone. Then I found the final message. The one that still appears in my nightmares. If you hear scratching inside the walls, it's already too late. The scratching started immediately. A slow dragging sound, directly beside us. Jake nearly dropped his flashlight. The noise continued. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Something was moving inside the wall, following us. The drywall bulged outward, only slightly, but enough. Enough to show something pressing against it from the other side. Something large, very large. Neither of us moved. The bulge traveled along the wall, tracking us, keeping pace. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Then it stopped. For several seconds, nothing happened. The silence became unbearable. Then a hand burst through the drywall. Jake screamed. The hand wasn't human. The fingers were too long. The joints bent incorrectly. Black claws scraped against the floor. More hands followed. Then an arm. Then a head. The thing forced itself through the wall like it had been hiding inside it the entire time. Its skin hung loosely from its body. Its eyes reflected the flashlight beam. Its mouth opened far wider than any animal should have been capable of. A hound. At the time, I didn't know its name. I only knew it looked hungry. The creature lunged. We ran. The hound smashed through tables behind us. With splintered, metal shelves crashed to the floor. The thing moved faster than any human. Its claws scraped against concrete. Its breathing echoed through the halls. Heavy, wet, animalistic. I could hear it gaining on us. Jake stumbled. For one terrifying second, he disappeared from view. The hound immediately changed direction. It knew. Predators always know. I turned back. Jake was struggling to stand. The creature launched itself toward him. I grabbed a broken metal pipe from the floor and swung with everything I had. The pipe connected with the side of its head. The impact barely slowed it, but it bought Jake enough time. We ran again. Corner, hallway, corner, room, corner, hallway. The back rooms blurred together. The hound remained behind us, always close, always hunting. Eventually, we reached a narrow opening between two walls, barely wide enough for a person. Jake squeezed through. I followed. The hound slammed into the gap seconds later. His claws reached toward us. Its jaws snapped shut inches from my face. Then it got stuck. The creature thrashed violently, growling, snarling, trying to force itself through. But it couldn't. After several minutes, it finally retreated. His footsteps faded into the distance. Neither of us spoke. We simply sat there, trying to breathe, trying to process what had happened. Then Jake pulled up his sleeve. My stomach dropped. 3 deep claw marks crossed his forearm. Fresh blood ran down his skin. The hound had gotten him. Jake stared at the wound, then looked at me. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, because out here, there were no hospitals, no medicine, no help, just us, and whatever waited in the endless halls ahead. At first, the wound didn't seem serious. 3 claw marks, some bleeding, nothing more. Jake even joked about it. Guess I lost the fight. I laughed, not because it was funny, because pretending everything was normal felt easier than accepting reality. For the next 2 days, we continued moving, searching for food, searching for survivors, searching for an exit. But something had changed, not in the back rooms. In Jake. Started small. He became quieter. Normally, he couldn't go 10 minutes without talking. Now entire hours passed in silence. Whenever I asked what was wrong, he always gave the same answer. Just tired. But I knew him. Something wasn't right. The first truly strange thing happened on day 12. I woke up to find Jake standing over me, watching. At first I thought he was waking me up. Then I realized he wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was simply staring. I sat upright. "What are you doing?" No response. "Jake." His eyes finally focused, almost like he'd been somewhere else. "Huh, you've been standing there." "What? How long have you been standing there?" He looked genuinely confused. "I just woke up." A chill ran through me, because I knew he was lying. Not intentionally, but lying nonetheless. I had opened my eyes several times throughout the night. Every time he'd been standing in the same spot, watching. The next incident happened later that day. We discovered another notebook. Most survivor journals contained warnings, directions, messages. This one was different. It described voices. Voices that appeared after prolonged exposure. Voices that sounded familiar. Voices that learned. I was halfway through reading when Jake suddenly snatched the notebook from my hands. His reaction shocked me. "Don't." "What?" "Don't read that." His voice sounded angry. Actually angry. The first genuine emotion I'd seen from him in days. "Why?" Jake stared at the notebook. For a moment he looked frightened. Then the expression vanished. "Nothing." He handed it back. The conversation ended there, or at least I thought it had. That night I woke to whispering. A quiet voice somewhere nearby. I assumed it was Jake talking in his sleep. Then I realized he wasn't asleep. He was sitting against the wall, facing away from me, speaking softly, having a conversation with someone. The problem was that nobody else was there. I understand. Pause. No. Pause. I won't. Pause. Stop asking. Every hair on my body stood up. I slowly reached for my flashlight. The beam illuminated the hallway. Empty. Completely empty. Yet Jake continued speaking, responding, listening, like somebody stood directly in front of him. Finally, I called his name. Jake! The whispering stopped instantly. He turned toward me. His expression looked terrified. Not angry, not hostile, terrified. What? Who were you talking to? His face went pale. I wasn't talking. Jake, I wasn't talking. The way he said it made me stop, because for the first time, I believed he wasn't lying. I genuinely think he couldn't remember. The following morning, we found something even worse. A dead wanderer, not pieces of one, not old remains, complete body. The man looked recently deceased, maybe only a few days. His backpack remained untouched, his supplies untouched. No obvious injuries, nothing, just a corpse sitting against the wall, as if he'd simply stopped living. Then we noticed the smile, a small smile, not a partygoer smile, not exaggerated, just enough to look wrong. His notebook lay open in his lap. The final entry read, "The voice knows my name." The next page contained only one sentence. "It sounds like my wife." Jake immediately closed the notebook. His hands were shaking. I looked at him. "You've heard it." It wasn't a question. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he nodded, slowly, reluctantly. "I didn't want to tell you." My stomach tightened. "Tell me what?" Jake looked down at the floor. The voice. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. For the first time, I realized how exhausted he looked, how scared. "It's been talking to me since the Hound attacked." I felt ice run through my veins. "What does it say?" Jake swallowed. "Different things." "What things?" "Directions." I stared at him. "What?" "It tells me where to go." A long silence followed. Then he continued, "And it's always right." Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. "Jake!" He looked up. "It's helped us." "No, it has." "No, Jake. You don't understand." His voice rose, for the first time in days. It knew where the outpost was. My blood ran cold, because he was right. The outpost had appeared shortly after the voice started. Jake continued speaking, faster now, almost desperate. "It knew where the batteries were. It knew where the water was. It knew where the Hound was." I didn't like where this was going. "What does it want?" The question hung in the air. Jake didn't answer. That scared me more than anything, because his silence told me everything. The voice wanted something, and Jake already knew what it was. Eventually he spoke, barely above a whisper. "It wants me to trust it." The fluorescent lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. Then all of them went dark. Complete darkness swallowed the hallway. For several seconds, neither of us moved. Then, somewhere far ahead in the blackness, a smile appeared, floating, motionless, watching us. And then another appeared beside it, and another, and another. Dozens of glowing smiles emerged from the darkness. The smilers had found us. At first, I thought the smiles were floating. Then one of them blinked. The darkness shifted, and I realized I wasn't looking at smiles. I was looking at faces. The rest of them was simply hidden. Dozens of figures stood throughout the hallway, perfectly still, waiting. The darkness belonged to them. Jake grabbed my arm. "Run." The smilers began moving, not sprinting, walking, slowly, deliberately, as if they already knew we couldn't escape. I switched on my flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness. The nearest smiler immediately recoiled. His grin vanished. The creature stumbled backward, almost frightened. "Light," I said. "What?" "They hate light." The flashlight swept across the hallway. Every smiler retreated. Not far, just enough, keeping their distance, watching, waiting. The realization brought relief. For about 3 seconds, then my flashlight flickered. The battery was dying. No! The beam dimmed. The nearest smiler stepped forward. The light brightened again. It stopped. Another flicker. Another step. Jake understood immediately. We need power. We started moving. Fast. The smilers followed. Never rushing. Never attacking. Just walking behind us. Hundreds of glowing teeth floating in the darkness. The flashlight continued weakening. Every minute the creatures moved closer. Every minute their confidence grew. The situation would have ended there. It would have ended with our bodies disappearing into the dark. Then we found the colony. The first sign was a light. A real light. Bright, steady, electric. We rounded a corner and froze. Barricades, metal walls, generators. People, actual people. A guard shouted something. A gate opened. Hands grabbed us, pulled us inside. Then the gate slammed shut. The smilers stopped outside, watching. Dozens of glowing smiles lingered beyond the barricades, but they didn't cross. They simply stared. The colony had survived. For now. I nearly cried. After almost 3 weeks of isolation, seeing other people felt unreal. There were around 20 survivors. Men, women, teenagers. Some had been trapped for months, others for years. Years. The thought nearly broke me. A woman named Sarah ran the settlement. Former paramedic. Practical. Tough. The kind of person who kept people alive. She listened to our story carefully. Then she asked one question. When did the voices start? Jake and I exchanged a glance. Sarah noticed immediately. Her expression darkened. One of you hears them. Jake looked away. Sarah sighed, like she'd heard the answer before. That's not good. I didn't like her tone. What does that mean? Nobody answered. The room became quiet, too quiet. Finally, an older survivor spoke. His name was Marcus. The Backrooms learns. I frowned. What? Marcus stared at the floor. When you stay here long enough, it learns who you are. Nobody laughed. Nobody argued. That scared me, because they all believed it. Sarah leaned forward. The voices start as strangers. Her voice remained calm. Then they become familiar. My stomach tightened. Jake remained silent. Sarah continued. They sound like friends, family, loved ones. The room felt colder. What happens if you listen? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Marcus spoke. You stop coming back. The words hung heavily in the air. I looked around. Every survivor seemed uncomfortable. Every single one. Like they all knew somebody who had vanished. Sarah eventually changed the subject. Food, water, shelter. For the first time in weeks, things felt almost normal. I slept on an actual mattress. I ate warm food. People laughed, talked, shared stories. Hope returned. For a little while. Then day 24 arrived. The generators failed. I woke to screaming. Complete darkness filled the colony. The generators had powered everything. Lights, security systems, defenses. Without them, the darkness belonged to the smilers. Flashlights flicked on throughout the camp. Panic spread instantly. People shouted, ran, grabbed supplies. Then somebody screamed. Not a frightened scream, a dying scream, the kind you never forget. A flashlight beam swung across the room. A smiler stood beside one of the barricades. Nobody knew how it got inside. The creature lunged. Chaos exploded. More smiles appeared, then more, then dozens. The colony collapsed in seconds. People scattered. Gunshots echoed through the darkness. Flashlights dropped. Batteries died. Screams filled every hallway. Sarah shoved a flashlight into my hands. Get out. What about everyone else? Go. A smiler tackled a survivor behind her. The screaming stopped almost immediately. Jake grabbed my shoulder. We have to leave. I hated him for saying it, because he was right. There was nothing we could do. The colony was finished. 20 survivors. Months of work. Years of survival. Gone. Destroyed in less than 10 minutes. Jake and I escaped through a maintenance corridor as the screams echoed behind us. Neither of us spoke for hours. The backrooms had finally taken away the one thing keeping us sane. Hope. And as we sat together in the endless yellow halls once again, Jake whispered something, so quietly I almost missed it. "She's getting stronger." I looked at him. "What?" His face had gone pale. The fear in his eyes looked genuine. For the first time since the voice appeared, Jake wasn't listening to it anymore. He was afraid of it, and that terrified me more than any entity we'd encountered. Because if the voice was capable of scaring Jake, then whatever was speaking to him wasn't just another trap. It was something much worse, something intelligent, something that had been watching us from the beginning. The voice revealed itself 3 days later. Up until then, I'd never heard it myself. Only Jake, only whispers, only warnings. But by day 27, something had changed. Maybe the colony's destruction had weakened us. Maybe we'd stayed too long. Or maybe the thing behind the voice had simply decided it was time. It happened while Jake was sleeping. At least I thought he was sleeping. I was sitting alone in a small room, staring at a half-dead flashlight battery, trying to figure out how much longer we'd survive. Then I heard my mother's voice. "Ethan." I froze. Every muscle in my body locked. Not because it sounded similar, because it sounded perfect. Exactly perfect. My mother's voice. The same tone. The same warmth. The same accent. The same everything. The problem was, my mother was back on Earth, thousands of miles away, and I was trapped inside a nightmare. "Ethan." The voice came again. Somewhere behind me, I turned. Nobody. Just yellow walls, wet carpet, buzzing lights. My heart pounded. Then I heard footsteps. Soft, slow, approaching. The voice continued. "You've been gone a long time." I squeezed my eyes shut. No. It wasn't real. Couldn't be. The footsteps stopped. Directly behind me, so close I could almost feel somebody standing there. Then the voice whispered, "Don't turn around." A cold wave passed through my body. Because the way she said it, the way she whispered, that wasn't my mother. Not anymore. Something else was wearing her voice. I spun around. Nothing. The hallway remained empty. The footsteps vanished. The voice vanished. But the damage was done. Now I understood. Now I understood why Jake had been changing. The thing didn't just speak. It learned, studied you, found the people you trusted most, then used them against you. When Jake woke up, I told him everything. His reaction scared me, because instead of surprise, he looked relieved. "You finally heard her." Her. Not it. Her. The voice had become a person to him. A real person. A friend. Maybe even more. "Jake." My voice sounded shaky. "We need to stop listening." He laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed through the hallway. "You still think she's lying?" I stared at him. "She wants us dead." "No." His expression hardened. For the first time, he looked angry. "She's trying to help us." I suddenly realized something. The Jake sitting beside me wasn't the same Jake who'd entered the backrooms. Not anymore. The change had happened slowly. So slowly I hadn't noticed. But now it was obvious. The voice had him. Completely. That evening, Jake admitted the truth. The voice had been guiding him for weeks. Every turn. Every hallway. Every decision. The outpost. The colony. Everything. The voice had known. Every single time. And somehow, that was worse. Because if it knew where everything was, then it wasn't trapped here. It belonged here. Jake eventually stood. "Come on." I didn't move. "Where?" "The exit." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "The exit." Jake nodded. "She found it." There it was again. The voice had become real to him. I should have walked away. I should have refused. But after 27 days, hope is dangerous. Hope makes people stupid. So I followed him. For hours we walked. The hallways became stranger. The wallpaper changed. The lights flickered. Rooms appeared that shouldn't have existed. Children's bedrooms, office spaces, entire apartments, pieces of reality stitched together incorrectly. The deeper we went, the less the backrooms felt like a place, and the more it felt like a living thing, watching, thinking, waiting. Finally, Jake stopped. A black door stood ahead, the first black door I'd ever seen. No handle, no markings, no frame, just darkness. Jake smiled. That's it. Something felt wrong immediately. Every instinct screamed at me. The same instinct that warned me about the partygoers. The same instinct that warned me about the voice. But Jake stepped forward, his eyes filled with excitement. We're going home. He opened the door, and my world collapsed. The room beyond wasn't an exit. It was a graveyard. Thousands of bones covered the floor. Human bones, children, adults, entire mountains of skeletons stretching into the darkness. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The smell hit next. Rot, decay, death, years of death. Jake stared, frozen. His smile disappeared. No! The word barely escaped his mouth. No! For the first time, the voice had been wrong. Or maybe it hadn't. Maybe it knew exactly what was behind the door. A whisper echoed through the room. Not from behind us, not ahead of us, everywhere. A woman's voice, soft, calm, amused. You were supposed to go inside. Jake dropped to his knees. The color drained from his face. You said it was real. The whisper laughed. The sound made my skin crawl. Not because it was loud, because it sounded happy. Happy that Jake was hurt. Happy that he'd trusted it. Happy that it had won. Then the fluorescent lights overhead exploded. Every bulb shattered simultaneously. Darkness swallowed everything. And from somewhere deep beyond the pile of bones, something enormous moved. Not a hound, not a smiler, not a partygoer. Something bigger, something older, something that had been waiting for us. And for the first time since entering the backrooms, the voice stopped pretending to be human. The thing laughed, and the entire backrooms laughed with it. The laugh didn't echo, spread, like a disease. The walls laughed, the ceiling laughed. The wet carpet beneath my feet seemed to vibrate with it. The sound came from everywhere at once, and then it stopped. Instantly, the silence that followed felt worse. The darkness remained absolute. Couldn't see Jake, couldn't see my own hands, couldn't even see the doorway behind us. Only breathing, mine, Jake's, and something else, something massive, something breathing far below us. A slow inhale, a slow exhale. The sound reminded me of a whale. If whales could hate. I grabbed my flashlight. My hands trembled. The beam flickered on. The light revealed the room, and I immediately wished it hadn't. The mountain of bones wasn't a mountain. It was a nest. Thousands of skeletons arranged deliberately, stacked, organized, collected, like trophies. Everywhere the light touched, I saw evidence of people. Clothing, backpacks, flashlights, shoes, entire lives reduced to leftovers. And at the center of it all, something moved. A shape larger than a truck slowly unfolded from the darkness. Its limbs were impossibly long. Too many joints, too many arms. Its body looked stitched together from different creatures, different people. Faces protruded from its skin. Dozens of them, hundreds. Frozen expressions trapped inside its flesh. Some crying, some screaming, some smiling. The sight nearly broke me. The thing raised its head, and every face opened its eyes. At once, the flashlight fell from my hand. Jake screamed. The entity turned toward him. Not me, Jake. The voice returned, but it wasn't pretending anymore. No mother, no wife, no friend, no comforting disguise. Its true voice sounded like thousands speaking together. You listened. Jake couldn't move. You trusted. The creature took another step. The ground shook beneath us. "You belong to me." "No." Jake finally stumbled backward. The entity tilted its head, curious, almost amused. "You asked for escape." Its voice echoed through every face embedded in its body. "And I offered it." Jake began crying, actual tears, the kind that come from complete hopelessness. "You lied." The entity smiled. Every face smiled, every single one. "I always lie." Then it lunged. The room exploded into chaos. Jake ran. I ran. The entity crashed through piles of bones behind us. Skeletons shattered. The floor cracked. The entire nest shook violently. For something so large, it moved horrifyingly fast. We sprinted toward the doorway. The entity followed. One of its arms slammed into the wall beside me. Concrete exploded. Dust filled the air. The impact nearly knocked me off my feet. Jake pulled me upright. "Go!" We burst back into the hallway. The black doorway collapsed behind us. For several seconds, the entity remained trapped inside. Then one of its hands emerged through the wall itself. Not the door, the wall, as if reality meant nothing to it. The fingers clawed toward us, stretching impossibly far, growing longer, longer, longer. We ran, and the hand followed, punching through walls, tearing through ceilings, smashing entire sections of hallway apart. The backrooms itself seemed to be falling apart. The fluorescent lights flickered wildly. Rooms shifted around us. Hallways changed shape. Reality bent. The place was unstable. And somehow I knew why. The entity wasn't supposed to leave its nest. And now it was angry, very angry. Eventually we found ourselves trapped. A dead end. No exits. No corners. Nothing. Just a blank room. The hand smashed through the wall behind us. Then another. Then another. 3 enormous arms reached inside. Searching. Hunting. Jake looked at me. For a moment he seemed like himself again. Not the frightened survivor. Not the follower of the voice. Just Jake. My best friend. The guy who got me into trouble. The guy who made me laugh. The guy who followed me into hell. He gave a sad smile. And suddenly I knew what he was thinking. "No." Jake nodded. "No." His smile grew. "You're getting out." My heart sank. "No, Ethan. No." He grabbed my shoulders. For the first time in weeks, his eyes looked clear. Completely clear. The voice showed me something. I shook my head. "I don't care." It showed me the real exit. The words hit me like a truck. "What?" Jake pointed toward the far wall. At first I saw nothing. Then the wallpaper shifted. A crack appeared, thin, black, like a tear in reality itself. The exit, the real one. My legs wouldn't move, because I already knew what came next. Jake looked over his shoulder. The entity's arms continued tearing through the room, getting closer, closer, closer. He laughed softly. "You know." My throat tightened. "Don't." I always wanted an excuse to do something heroic. I couldn't speak. Jake shoved me toward the crack. Hard. "Ethan." The entity finally broke through. Its full body entered the room. Every face staring at us. Every face screaming. Jake turned toward it. Alone. He picked up a rusted metal pipe from the floor. The most useless weapon imaginable. Then he smiled. A real smile. His own smile. "Come get me." The entity charged. Jake charged. And I jumped through the crack. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was Jake laughing and the entity screaming. Then reality disappeared beneath my feet. I expected to die. When I jumped through the crack, I genuinely believed that was it. No heroic ending. No rescue. No miracle. Just darkness. Endless darkness. For what felt like hours, I fell. The backrooms vanished. The entity vanished. Even the buzzing lights were gone. There was nothing. No sound. No sensation. No gravity. Then I woke up. I was lying in a hospital bed. Sunlight poured through a nearby window. For several seconds, I couldn't process what I was seeing. A window. Actual sunlight. trees swaying outside, birds, cars, the real world. I burst into tears, not because I was happy, because I'd forgotten what reality looked like. A nurse ran into the room, then another, then a doctor. Questions started immediately. Who was I? Where had I been? Did I remember my name? Did I know the date? The date hit me hardest. 30 days. Exactly 30 days. I had been missing for 30 days. The same amount of time I'd spent in the back rooms. Not 3 years. Not 10 minutes. 30 days. Exactly. That shouldn't have surprised me. Instead, it terrified me, because it meant the backrooms followed rules. Rules I didn't understand. And anything with rules can plan. The police questioned me repeatedly. I told them the truth, or at least part of it. I told them Jake and I got lost. I told them we'd become separated. I told them I couldn't remember everything. Nobody believed me. Honestly, I didn't blame them. How do you explain a place that shouldn't exist? How do you explain monsters hiding inside walls? How do you explain a living nightmare that studies people? You don't. So eventually I stopped trying. 3 weeks later, I returned home. My apartment felt different. Smaller. Normal. I should have felt safe. Instead, I couldn't sleep. Every night I woke up expecting to see yellow walls. Every creak sounded like footsteps. Every flickering light made my heart race. The worst part came at 3:17 a.m. Every night, without fail. I woke up at exactly 3:17. At first I thought it was coincidence. Then it happened again, and again, and again. Always 3:17. Always. One night I finally figured out why. I woke to a sound. A familiar sound. A sound I'd spent 30 days trying to ignore. Buzzing. Fluorescent buzzing. My eyes opened. The room was dark, but I could hear it clearly. The same electrical hum from the back rooms. Somewhere inside my apartment, I sat upright, listening. The buzzing continued. Low, constant, impossible. Then came the footsteps. My blood froze. Slow footsteps, directly outside my bedroom. Step, step, step. The sound stopped outside my door, exactly like it had in the back rooms. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight. The footsteps remained motionless, waiting, listening. The doorknob slowly turned. Couldn't breathe. The handle rotated halfway, then stopped. Silence. Complete silence. I sat there for nearly an hour, waiting. Eventually the sun rose. The buzzing disappeared. The footsteps vanished. The doorknob remained still. When I finally opened the door, nobody was there. Nothing. No signs. No evidence. But deep down, I knew something had followed me. Months passed. Life slowly returned to normal. Or at least I pretended it did. I got another job, moved apartments, started therapy, tried to move on, tried to forget. Then one evening, somebody knocked on my door. 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. I checked the peephole and nearly collapsed. Jake stood outside, my best friend, alive. For several seconds I couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't breathe. It wasn't possible. I had watched him sacrifice himself. I'd watched him face the entity. He should have been dead. Yet there he was, standing outside my apartment, alive. I opened the door. Jake! He didn't answer. I laughed, actually laughed. Relief flooded through me. I grabbed him, pulled him into a hug. For a moment he didn't react. Then he slowly wrapped his arms around me. The movement felt wrong, stiff, mechanical, like he'd forgotten how. I stepped back. Where have you been? No answer. Jake? Still nothing. Something felt off. Very off. His clothes were clean, too clean. Not a scratch, not a stain, not a wrinkle, as though he'd just been manufactured. Then I noticed his smile. Small, subtle, but there. A smile that never changed, never moved, never faded. The room suddenly felt cold. Jake! He finally spoke, and my blood turned to ice. The voice wasn't his, not completely, It sounded like dozens of voices speaking together, layered beneath his own, like something else was talking through him. "We missed you." My legs nearly gave out. "Not I. Not me. We." Jake smiled wider, far wider than any human should have been able to. The corners of his mouth stretched and stretched and stretched until blood began running down his cheeks. I stumbled backward. Jake took one step forward, still smiling, still staring. Then he said something I'll never forget. Something that still keeps me awake years later. "The door is open now." The lights in my apartment flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. And for a split second, the walls weren't my apartment walls. They were yellow. The carpet wasn't carpet. It was wet. The air smelled like mold. And standing behind Jake, I saw hundreds of smiling faces, watching, waiting, patient. The lights returned. Everything vanished. Jake was gone. The hallway outside stood empty. No footsteps, no elevator sounds, no doors closing, nothing. He had simply disappeared. The police never found him. Nobody ever did. But sometimes, at exactly 3:17 a.m., I wake up to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom door. And every now and then, I hear Jake's voice, softly, patiently, waiting for me to answer, telling me he's found a way back, telling me he just wants to come home. And every night, I remember the final thing the entity said before I escaped. The words I didn't understand back then, the words I understand now. "You never leave the backrooms. You only bring it with you." And lately, the buzzing has been getting louder. If you enjoyed tonight's story, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for more scary stories, horror narrations, and unsettling tales to fall asleep to. And before you go, if you woke up tomorrow in the backrooms, how long do you think you'd survive? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, sleep well. And if you hear footsteps outside your bedroom door at 3:17 a.m., don't answer.